Hi, this is Frank Stallone, and welcome to All Things P.I. with your host, Scott Ross.
Hey, good morning. It's Thursday morning again, August 16th. We do not have a studio guest today, so I would like to urge anybody to call in if you have any questions. Phone number here is area 818-850-7784. My cell phone, if you want to send me a text, I won't answer it, is area 818-744-9827. A couple things I wanted to bring up. Aretha Franklin died this morning, and I don't normally get involved in ongoing current information. Apparently, she died of pancreatic cancer, and I'm very sorry. It's a tragic loss. But I also wanted to mention that a friend of mine passed away recently, Jack Tremarco, about a week ago. Also died of pancreatic cancer. Jack is a former FBI agent, very well-known polygraph expert. There really wasn't anything in the media about it, which just kind of surprises me. But Jack was, when he was with the Bureau and is with the FBI, Jack is also very famously known for clearing Dr. Lee of Los Alamos, the national security issues down in New Mexico, when they thought that they found a disk, I guess, a computer disk behind a file cabinet. And it was thought that Dr. Lee was somehow involved in espionage. And Jack also cleared Richard Jewell, who was the initial suspected Atlanta Olympics bomber, the security guard that was taken into custody. And Jack went down to Atlanta and polygraphed and cleared and subsequently apologized to Richard Jewell, which I know Jack got a lot of heat for. The FBI sort of stepped in and said, we don't really apologize to anybody. But anyway, Jack passed away on the 6th. It's a very tragic loss for all of Los Angeles. In fact, for the defense attorneys and defense investigators, Jack was very publicly and involved, I guess you should say, in dealing with former District Attorney Steve Cooley. Jack was always meeting with Cooley and going through the importance of using polygraphs, even though they're not admissible in court. But Jack was forever trying to get the District Attorney's office to acknowledge and use the polygraphs in the investigation of their cases. And in fact, one of the cases that I dealt with, the most recent one I dealt with Jack, was Lois Goodman, who was arrested for killing her husband with a coffee cup. Lois was the tennis referee who was arrested in New York by LAPD. Although she lives in Woodland Hills, California, they went out to New York and they arrested her very publicly at the U.S. Open. And Jack had polygraphed her when she got back here. And again, she passed the polygraph. And subsequently, the charges were all dismissed by the DA's office when it was determined that Lois's husband actually died of a heart attack at 80 years old with an existing heart condition. Anyway, I just wanted to mention, I don't know why it didn't get any attention that Jack had passed away. And it was an incredibly tragic loss to all of us in the defense program. Also, hopefully joining me next week will be attorney Pat Harris, who is one of Scott Peterson's attorneys. And today is also his birthday. Pat, if you're listening, happy birthday. But one of the reason I'm even bringing that up is because I saw in the media today there was another pregnant woman who was allegedly killed by her husband, although my understanding is this gentleman confessed, along with 2 children. So again, all of these things sort of tie together. I don't, again, from a defense standpoint, certainly somebody's ultimately going to have to represent this gentleman, unless he just flat out pleads out, but he'll still have to do it with the assistance of an attorney. And again, it's all of these things, except for Pat's birthday, of course. All of these things are very tragic. The other thing I'd like someone to call in about, again, area 818-850-7784. I've been getting a lot of calls from these production companies lately. Everybody's wanting to reinvent the wheel on Robert Blake, and I don't really understand what that's all about. I'm kind of curious if anybody has any interest in the case. There have been several different shows recently on Robert Blake, and now apparently somebody wants to do another one. Again, I'm trying to understand why that is. I don't really get the interest in Robert Blake's case. It's not a mystery. It never was a mystery. Blake flat out didn't do it. He was acquitted of all charges, although that doesn't mean that he wasn't responsible for it, and I have my own beliefs on that. Blake was also found civilly liable by another jury, which, again, I don't really know why this renewed interest. I was wondering if anybody else had any idea why all of a sudden the public seems to be interested in this. There's also two other stories in the media of, interestingly, on the same day, so today, there's two stories on MSN of two people who were convicted, wrongly convicted, who both had their convictions reversed. And what's sort of disturbing, and as I'm reading the story, I'm sitting here and I see that in these, that they say that the investigators for the defense go back after the fact. These people doing the appeals apparently go back after the fact, and then they start finding all of these things that were turned over in the discovery, pictures or documents or interviews or things of that nature that weren't there before. I recently met with an individual who had been convicted, allegedly soliciting someone to kill their spouse. And again, the same thing during the trial. There was a series of information that the defense was alleging was never turned over to them. And at further look, it turns out that the information in the items were there. I guess from an investigative standpoint, I'm sort of trying to understand how it is that things like that get missed. I guess everybody, I understand that everybody misses, you can't, I don't want to say you can't look at everything. You can look at everything. And in fact, I believe that I try and look at every single thing that's ever turned over to us, inclusive of documents that I've had literally 1 million documents turned over. There was a case up in San Francisco I'm not going to get into, but the government will turn over, the prosecution will turn over thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents. And I don't really understand how sort of after the fact, I get that you have more time, but after the fact, things like this sort of go by the wayside. And then you have the civil suits. And of course, these two gentlemen, one was in Michigan. Again, I had a case in Michigan, Conrad Montgomery, who is now out of prison. And Conrad was convicted wrongfully of a robbery that he just flat out didn't do. And the police based it on cell phone information, and they based it on bad identification. And when Conrad was in custody, he sent me the cell phone records. Again, I've been recognized by the courts as a cell tower expert, and he didn't have the proper documents. For whatever reason, he didn't have them at the time. And so when I went through the documents, I looked at the cell towers, and I wrote a very detailed letter back to Conrad to teach him how to read cell towers. And so he did his own analysis, turned it over to the court, and now he's been actually, not only was the verdict reversed, he was what's called a factual finding of innocence. So and that gets into the computer. So when somebody when somebody gets arrested and the police do a background, now what it pulls up, because you can't remove somebody's name from the computer. So when if God forbid he gets arrested, somebody gets arrested, they see the name. Now underneath this, it will have what's called a factual finding of innocence, so that again it can't be used against him, and they can't use it as information to potentially file charges, because again it's one of those issues. You didn't do it. So anyway, again, I'd like anyone to call in that has any comments or any questions or any interest. It's area 818-850-7784. Give me a call. And again, if you know of anybody who was arrested, wrongfully convicted, this gentleman, his name is Ott, O-T-T, Mr. Ott in Milwaukee, was just paid out $6.5 million in a settlement. Again, it's sort of mind-boggling to me that the government has the money to prosecute, but they don't have the money, or they claim that they don't have the money to investigate correctly or to run the police correctly, whatever the case may be. But they do have the money to shell out when they wrongfully convict somebody, $6.5 million. It's not going to give him the time back. Apparently, he spent 13 years in custody. And it just shouldn't be like that. Well, we have to take a commercial break. Give me a call. Scott Ross, 818-744-9827 is my cell. Thank you.
KCAA 1050 AM. Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you always tired and worn out? Is it affecting your work and personal life? Well, South Pacific Sleep Lab can help you out. South Pacific Sleep Lab provides a personal study of your sleep patterns. With their trained specialists, they will diagnose your sleep habits and will give you a prognosis for getting a great relaxing night of sleep. South Pacific Sleep Lab has locations throughout Southern California, including Fontana, and will provide transportation to any of their locations at no cost to you. To find out more, give them a call at 844-SAD-5050. That's 844-SAD-5050. South Pacific Sleep Lab. Start resting easy and sleeping sound today.
Hi, my name is Phil Grandy, philsgang.com. Most people would love to be in the stock market, but they're scared not being in. They're scared about not getting out in time. Well, that is over, because now you can join Phil's Gang and my stock video program and follow me with specific stock on the video, and you will be out in time.
Find out more at philsgang.com or call 877-600-GANG. That's 877-600-4264. Why pay thousands of dollars for a weekend seminar when for only $39.95 a month, philsgang.com provides all the daily market investing information you need to make profits in the stock market. With over 40 years of investing experience, only Phil Grandy and the philsgang.com team provide daily live investing webinars, up-to-the-minute market updates, all the investing educational videos you can imagine. Don't hesitate to learn, invest, and make profits. Go to philsgang.com or call 877-600-GANG, 877-600-4264.
Bye-bye, sailor.
Okay, we're back. There's also in City News Service today, there's also an indication that LAPD shootings are up 10% in 2017. Apparently, there were 44 officer-involved shootings. 31 suspects were actually hit. 17 people died. Again, and ultimately, LAPD turns around and they start settling these civil cases, and they seem to have the money to settle out the civil cases, and the taxpayers have to pay for it. You know, back to people being wrongfully accused, there was, again, a case that I was personally involved in, and I try to limit what I talk about to cases that I am very familiar with. There's a gentleman out of Glendale who was arrested for a home invasion murder. And in the same way that these people, this gentleman, that Mr. Ott, who is claiming that the witnesses were coerced by law enforcement to identify him, the case I had out of Glendale was a similar situation where these 5 people broke into this woman's house. They were looking for money that one of her sons allegedly had. The other son, the brother, came home from school, 12:30 in the afternoon, came in the house, saw what was going on, saw that these people were taping up and tying up his mother, and he tried to save his mother valiantly and was shot and killed. So Glendale PD goes to the mother, and they decide who their suspect is going to be based on the mother's description that the person that actually shot her son appeared to be somebody else. She said he looked like somebody that the mother knew, although said it wasn't the same person, but that's who he resembled. And so Glendale PD went out and they arrested the individual that they claim he looked like, not the one that she said it was. And when the mother went to identify him, the Glendale Police Department, these 2 detectives, said, "We have lots of other information. It isn't just going to be your testimony." And they had no other information. And in fact, it turned out that cell towers actually put him about 8 miles away from the shooting at within 6 minutes of the crime. And anybody who's ever been to or lives in Los Angeles knows you can't get at 12:30 in the afternoon. You can't get 6 miles away in 6 minutes, no matter where you are. And so the bottom line is, again, we were able to establish that it wasn't him. And the police made a representation to a detective that I know who was part of a similar task force who would not come forward, which is a whole separate issue, but said they knew it wasn't him, but because there were 5 co-defendants, that if they gave up the fact that it wasn't this individual, that it would give these other people a false sense of security. In essence, since They felt that the public arrest or the arrest was putting these other people sort of in the posture that the police were on the wrong trail. They arrested this gentleman who sat in custody for 8 months. Well, in the interim, at the end of it all, the Glendale Police Department, the city of Glendale, had to shell out $1.5 million. And in doing so, it was one of the rare and first cases that the judge, it was a federal case, that the judge basically awarded punitive damages against the police officers. And again, this is one of those cases, and I talked to, if you listen to the show with Dave Rudolph before, that the prosecution, even though the prosecutor knew what was going on, she was granted immunity. The prosecutors are immune from civil suits, basically, because they always make the claim that they are going by the representation of the police department, and that's essentially how they come to the conclusion they come to. In the interim, in an unrelated case, the gentleman that actually did pull the trigger, who is currently in custody, was involved in another shooting. And that person was then arrested and was put into county jail for 6 counts of attempted murder. He shot 2 other people, was put into custody, and eventually was convicted of the attempted murder and subsequently sentenced to life without possibility of parole, but was never charged with the murder of this young kid that he actually did kill. And so I get everybody seems to be happy that he's off the street, but the family, the victim's family that lost their son, really sort of gets no closure on it. And even though he's not going to get out of prison, the fact is he should still be held to answer for it. But Glendale PD made such noise about the fact that they had the right person in custody, they had the right suspect, and they were sticking behind it, even though they knew it wasn't true. And then cost the citizens $1.5 million. The short version is that it's law enforcement tends to do what they want to do, and it creates a problem. And then I sit here and I look at these people in Wisconsin, and again, this kid Conrad Montgomery, who ultimately got out, and it doesn't really seem to be about the truth. It's about them trying to prove their case. I actually just got a text. Somebody asked me what was the most difficult case that I've ever worked on. I don't know if there was one, but the most difficult cases are any time that you're dealing with somebody who is absolutely not guilty. And I did have a case that went to 3 separate trials. It was a murder case. This gentleman was accused of throwing his 4-year-old daughter off a cliff. He simply didn't do it. He was negligent. And again, this is a clear case of what's called involuntary manslaughter. It's a matter of gross negligence. In fact, Dr. Conrad Murray was convicted of the same charge with Michael Jackson, failing to sort of monitor a drug that needs to be monitored at all times. Again, it was one of those issues with Conrad Murray where I personally felt that it was really more of a civil negligence more than criminal. But regardless, it's involuntary manslaughter is not, it doesn't have the intent to kill. In fact, when you get sentenced for that, it's not even considered to be a violent crime. And as a result, under California law, and I say it all the time, I can only speak for California law, that you're actually only doing 50%. I just got a text from somebody who said that they're trying to get through on the studio phone and it goes straight to voicemail. But the question is, why do the police stop looking for other suspects when they have a theory about someone they think fits the crime? That's exactly what we were just talking about. Yeah, I can't really answer that. Law enforcement, again, sadly, unfortunately, and not all of them, because there are some really great cops out there. Law enforcement tends to Is that a call?
No, I'm just testing it out.
Oh, law enforcement tends to sort of create a that was a test. Don't go hide under your desk. It's not an earthquake test, just a test. Law enforcement tends to sort of set a profile and sometimes and unfortunately sort of predetermine who or what they're looking for. and in doing so, don't always follow up on it. And the upside downside, the upside is I don't want to say it's good when they do that, but that's why I have a job, because again, my job is to go ahead and sort of follow up on the things that they don't. The other problem, though, is it's really not my job to solve the crime. That's not really what private investigators do, in spite of what you might see on television. And then there's the old adage that you have to make the crime, you have to make the issue fit the facts instead of trying to make the facts fit the issue. And unfortunately, law enforcement, again, with this gentleman in Glendale, they were trying to make the situation fit the facts, and they simply didn't. It wasn't a matter of truth. And I can't answer why they do that. That's something that law enforcement would have to try and ultimately figure out. But it happens all too often. Again, you see these cases over and over, and people getting released. DNA is a great thing, and DNA actually created not only a whole new science, but it also gives out the ability for people to make certain arguments. And, the theory being is that the DNA is what's going to start solving crimes in the future. And in fact, this case out of Glendale, ultimately what happened was law enforcement determined 8 months after the fact that the actual shooter had lost a baseball hat and left it behind. It wasn't picked up by them. It was left at the house. And ultimately, when the family was sort of looking around the house after they cleaned up, the loss of their son, they saw this black baseball hat. I think it was like a Los Angeles, like a black Dodger hat. And it was sitting there and nobody recognized it. So intelligently, rather than do anything with it, they picked up the phone, called Glendale PD and said, this hat doesn't belong here. They took it. That hat was ultimately tested and came out with the DNA results for the gentleman, again, that I spoke of earlier, who is currently in prison for these other attempted murders. But again, it's just an issue over and over and over and over of these wrongfully convicted people. The Innocence Project that is now all over the place, and doing some amazing work and being able to get all of this DNA tested. But again, it doesn't change that the police aren't having to pay the price, and I don't mean monetarily. That there's really no justification when these people go out and I say people being law enforcement go out and they get people to testify, or they pressure, as was reported in here with Mr. Ott, that witnesses were actually pressured into saying that he's the gentleman. I don't really understand why they would do that, but it's an issue, and it's an issue that's not uncommon. There was another one. See if I can pull it up. There was another case also. Aaron Salter, Salter, again from Michigan. The other one was Wisconsin, but this one is from Michigan, who had a case reversed from 2003. Again, basically 15 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. Again, there's going to be a civil suit. There's going to be money involved. Again, Conrad Montgomery has a civil suit he's suing. I think he was in for 3 years. Is that a call? No?
Nope.
Oh, okay, sorry. And again, all of these civil suits, takes away money when the police ask you to vote for something and they indicate that there's no funds, there's no public money to add more police officers to the street, there's no money for new equipment, there's no money for additional training, all of these issues that law enforcement says there's no money for. There would probably be money if they would actually investigate the cases a little more carefully and a little more thoroughly. So anyway, give us a call, 818-850-7784. I'd still like to know why anybody cares about Robert Blake and why these production companies keep calling me and wanting to do a story on Robert Blake. My cell phone's 818-744-9827 if you would prefer to send me a text. You're listening to All Things P.I. This is Scott Ross, and we'll be right back. Thank you.
NBC Talk Radio, KCAA 1050 AM.
Hi, my name is Phil Grandy, philsgang.com. Most people would love to be in the stock market, but they're scared not being in. They're scared about not getting out in time. Well, that is over because now you can join Phil's Gang and my stock video program and follow me with specific stock on the video, and you will be out in time.
Find out more at philsgang.com or call 877-600-GANG. That's 877-600-4264. Why pay thousands of dollars for a weekend seminar when for only $39.95 a month? philsgang.com provides all the daily market investing information you need to make profits in the stock market. With over 40 years of investing experience, only Phil Grandy and the philsgang.com team provide daily live investing webinars, up-to-the-minute market updates, all the investing educational videos you can imagine. Don't hesitate to learn, invest, and make profits. Go to philsgang.com or call 877-600-GANG, 877-600-4264.
Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you always tired and worn out? Is it affecting your work and personal life? Well, South Pacific Sleep Lab can help you out. South Pacific Sleep Lab provides a personal study of your sleep patterns. With their trained specialists, they will diagnose your sleep habits and will give you a prognosis for getting a great relaxing night of sleep. South Pacific Sleep Lab has locations throughout Southern California, including Fontana, and will provide transportation to any of their locations at no cost to you. To find out more, give them a call at 844-SAD-5050. That's 844-SAD-5050. South Pacific Sleep Lab. Start resting easy and sleeping sound today.
Okay, we are back again, 818-850-7784, or send me a text, 818-744-9827. I got a text. Somebody asked me about following people. Okay, kind of interesting. Can private investigators be hired to follow somebody? Yeah, unfortunately, we have a caller, or is that
Yep.
Yeah. I'll get back to that in a second. Hi, caller. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hello?
Oh, hi. Hey, so I have a question about Robert Blake.
Okay.
Now, I kind of remember a little bit about this. Did he have a gun permit? I mean, he said something about he left his gun or something, and he had to go back for it. When he came back, that's when his wife was shot. I mean, I don't understand. He obviously didn't shoot her, but seems kind of odd the way that all happened. Can you explain any of that? Is that possible?
Actually, that's probably one of that's a really good question, and I'll tell you why. Because that's one of the things that the media focused on, the alleged absurdity that Robert would have a weapons permit and leave his gun in the restaurant. And the fact remains that it was very real. In fact, one of the things that they tried to say didn't happen, and that was the nonsense, that Robert Blake didn't actually, nobody would ever leave a gun behind that had a weapons permit, blah, blah, blah. And that's actually not true. So the real story is that Blake had a concealed weapons permit issued through LA County, and what he had done is there was the chief of police in Culver City who would give weapons permits as long as you had a residential address in Culver City to celebrities. And I forget his name. I think it was Ted Fox. Anyway, he had signed for Blake's permit, and on the back of a weapons permit, you have the serial numbers of the guns, plural, that you're allowed to carry. Well, Blake had 3 vehicles, and he had 3 guns listed on the back of the weapons permit. And he didn't actually carry the gun. What Robert would do is he would drive around with the gun in the car, typically under the seat or in the glove box, whatever, but he didn't actually carry it on him. And when he would get pulled over, if he would get pulled over by law enforcement, he would produce his weapons permit, and he would say, I have a gun, it's in the car, and whatever gun it happened to be. On this particular night, he went into the restaurant, and he actually took the gun with him. He claims at Bonnie's request. Again, it's hard to believe anything that comes out of Robert Blake's mouth, but he claims that Bonnie requested him to carry the gun in because she had some stalkers. Well, based on her business, her Lonely Hearts, they kept calling it, I don't know what that is, based on her mail order business, she probably had a lot of people pretty angry with her. And so he carried the gun inside. And when they went back out to the car, he had picked up his sweatshirt. The gun was wrapped up in his sweatshirt, and the gun did fall out of his sweatshirt. So all of that, again, for a lot of the stuff that Robert said was absolute nonsense. But interestingly, that aspect wasn't. That was real. Can I ask you a question? Oh, I lost you. Oh, so that particular aspect of Robert Blake carrying the gun, or having a gun, or having a weapons permit, yeah, that was all accurate. And of course, he had a revolver at 38, and LAPD took it into custody. It was initially ultimately booked and test fired, but when all is said and done, it was not a 38 that actually caused the death. It was the 9mm that was recovered from the dumpster. Again, I'm still trying to figure out what this renewed interest is in Robert Blake, and I'm still trying to understand why I keep getting calls from these production companies, but yet there they are. I hope that answered your question. If you have any others, or anybody else has a question, again, it's 818-850-7784. Back to private investigators follow people. Yeah, in fact, that's probably a pretty significant portion of what most investigators do. I do not. I get calls for it. California has what's called a no-fault divorce state. You can go file for divorce because it's Thursday and you're bored. So there really isn't any justification for following a spouse around other than personal information, personal satisfaction. Another call that I get, a lot of times people want to know, they want to follow somebody to determine if they're doing drugs because they're in a child custody issue. I don't do domestic. I turn that over to people that there's a group of law enforcement officers that, that hire out when they're off duty and do stuff like that. I don't do it. I do civil cases, and typically I do criminal defense. So I don't go out and follow people, but you can. And I've advised people on numerous occasions that you can do it on your own. Clearly, common sense falls into play here. Go out and rent a car. The best type of car, or the best color, I should say, for a car is something white because they tend to blend in. Today's cars also look so much alike that unless somebody is really a car person, it's one of those things that nobody's going to really recognize the car. And if somebody is doing something they shouldn't be and they're looking for a spouse, odds are they're looking for their own car. So I tell people, if you're going to follow somebody, go out and rent a car, rent a white car. And again, nothing more than common sense. Keep a distance behind. If you can get somebody else to help you, a friend, you don't have to go out and spend a ton of money on private investigators because, again, the testimony is not of issue. It's not like, I think, in New York that you have to prove some form of infidelity. And if you go to trial, you can actually fight a divorce. And again, I'm not positive that still exists. But if you go to trial and you have to fight it and you have to bring in a private investigator to testify, somebody qualified to testify on your behalf, California doesn't have that. California doesn't have that law in effect. In the same way that there's no common law marriages in California, people tended not to realize that as well. So yeah, private investigators get hired to follow people. And then last week, I think we had a caller, somebody who had an injury. I believe it was a work comp injury, and that individual was asking about being followed for the injury. Again, you have the same situation where odds are you don't have a licensed private investigator, but you have a firm that gets hired, and that individual is working under the direction of the individuals, the company that actually hold the license. And again, they ultimately can be called in to testify. You have to lay the foundation for a photograph or video or whatever they're taking, and ultimately come in and they can testify. But again, my complaint for those people, not for me, but on their behalf, is that those hours that those individuals are being brought in for just simply don't count toward their PI license. So if you're interested, if you're listening to the show and interested in being a private investigator, it's kind of important that the time that you invest and the time that you spend, that can translate obviously to money and income, that the hours that you're actually working toward your license account for something. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels and wasting your time. So I got another text here back on Robert Blake. Nobody's answering my question. Why does anybody care about Robert Blake's case? So I got another question here about the conviction. He was convicted. He wasn't convicted. He was acquitted of the actual murder. The prosecution's case in Robert Blake, their theory was that Robert actually pulled the trigger. They charged him, and it's kind of a weird. They should have been separated, but it's the same incident, so you can't. But they charged him with the actual murder, meaning that he pulled the trigger, and then they charged him with solicitation, a lesser count of solicitation. That charge was actually the jury was hung on that allegation. But it's kind of weird because you have to go in and you go into court and tell the jury. So he tried to hire somebody, but if he didn't hire, he couldn't hire somebody, so he just did it himself. And it's almost like they wanted to have it both ways. You either did it or you didn't do it. And it was somewhat confusing. And part of the other issue is that one of their star witnesses, I believe Gary McClarty, who was a stuntman that claimed that he was approached by Blake, was put on a mental hold. He had a serious drug problem. He believed he was being contacted by outer space aliens. And again, this all was established when Tom Mesereau and I were doing the preliminary hearing, but obviously not the trial, and the trial being done by Jerry Schwartzbach. The only thing that really changed between the prelim and the actual trial was Gary McClarty's what's called a 5150 Welfare and Institution Code. If you want to look it up, it's when somebody is a danger to themselves or a danger to the public, you get put on a 72-hour hold called a 5150 hold. Anyway, so that was, for lack of a better term, the explanation. They could have retried him on the solicitation matters and didn't do that. Again, it's not uncommon to, when you get hung juries, the LADA's office actually has a policy, or they used to have a policy. If it was 7-5 in favor of acquittal, they wouldn't retry, and that is, unfortunately, depending on the media attention that a case is getting. A classic example is Phil Spector. I believe Phil Spector was tended to in favor of guilt, so they retried him. That's actually not a good analogy or a good example. But LADA's office doesn't typically retry cases when they get a hung jury straight out of the box. Okay, so let's see. See if I can. I got another text again, Robert Blake, but nobody's really asking the question. I'm still trying to find out why anybody cares about Robert Blake. I get calls all the time for other shows. Michael Jackson, I get calls every now and then. People call regarding Michael Jackson, but Michael Jackson was acquitted. So again, I'm sort of at a loss to understand. They want you to stand in front of a camera and talk about something that frankly just didn't happen. I'll also say that in the light of the civil actions that seem to follow things, again, O.J. Simpson or even Robert Blake, who were acquitted, and Michael Jackson, who was acquitted, it still didn't prevent the civil cause of action. And I'm still surprised that Michael Jackson was never sued civilly by the accuser, although, the accuser had, and the accuser's mother, who would have been called as a witness, had so much baggage post that trial. It would have been a free for all, frankly. And one second. I don't know if anybody knows or not, but the accuser's mother, her name is Janet Ventura, Janet Arvizo. Also, after the Jackson trial, had submitted a welfare claim and was collecting money fraudulently from for the welfare. She was subsequently charged with a felony, pled out, did no jail time, but pled to a felony. Interestingly, married somebody, and now her name is Janet Jackson, no relation. And, okay, we'll be back. 818-850-7784. Give us a call, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you.
NBC Talk Radio, KCAA 1050 AM.
Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you always tired and worn out? Is it affecting your work and personal life? Well, South Pacific Sleep Lab can help you out. South Pacific Sleep Lab provides a personal study of your sleep patterns. With their trained specialists, they will diagnose your sleep habits and will give you a prognosis for getting a great relaxing night of sleep. South Pacific Sleep Lab has locations throughout Southern California, including Fontana, and will provide transportation to any of their locations at no cost to you. To find out more, give them a call at 844-SAD-5050. That's 844-SAD-5050. South Pacific Sleep Lab. Start resting easy and sleeping sound today.
Hi, my name is Phil Grandy, philsgang.com. Most people would love to be in the stock market, but they're scared not being in. They're scared about not getting out in time. Well, that is over because now you can join Phil's Gang and my stock video program and follow me with specific stock on the video, and you will be out in time.
Find out more at philsgang.com or call 877-600-GANG. That's 877-600-4264. Why pay thousands of dollars for a weekend seminar when for only $39.95 a month, philsgang.com provides all the daily market investing information you need to make profits in the stock market. With over 40 years of investing experience, only Phil Grandy and the philsgang.com team provide daily live investing webinars, up-to-the-minute market updates, all the investing educational videos you can imagine. Don't hesitate to learn, invest, and make profits. Go to philsgang.com or call 877-600-GANG, 877-600-4264.
Okay, we are back again. I got a text, somebody asking me about Michael Jackson. Sorry, my other phone is ringing. Somebody asking me about Michael Jackson, if I ever met him. No, I didn't actually. Well, that's not true. I did meet him one time, shook his hand, and actually did not have any conversation after the initial meeting with Michael. Michael's dealt with Susan Yu primarily. They spoke for hours, and I mean hours, every day after trial. And with Tom. Tom was sort of preparing for the following day. I did go up to Michael's house on numerous occasions. I did have dinner at the house with Tom a couple times, but I never actually sat down. In fact, when Tom Mesereau called me and asked me if I wanted to go with him to do the trial, first thing he said, interestingly, was, "You're probably never going to deal with the actual client. He just doesn't want anything to do with really anybody," and it's sort of hard not to understand why he wouldn't want anything to do with people at that point, having been taken advantage of. But I did go up to the house. I did get sort of a very detailed tour of the house. One of the things that we did was we walked around the house and we were looking for things left behind or whatever traces of the search warrant that the Santa Barbara County Sheriffs had served. Bringing in 70 people, it's sort of hard to determine in a house that size. I don't know exactly how large it is, but I can tell you that Michael's bedroom alone, just the bedroom, that did include the master bathrooms, plural, there were 2, but the actual bedroom itself was 3,000 square feet. So when, the whole thing about people spending the night in Michael's room, it's not, it's 3,000 square feet. It's not the size of what you would think even a large room of 20 by 20, which would be, what's that, 400 square feet. This was 3,000 square feet. So I got a pretty significant tour of the house, went around and saw all the places. He had a theater. There were some exposed phone lines. It looked like the sheriff's department had gone into his phone system. I don't know exactly what they were looking for. We had to bring in some people to make sure that they weren't trying to tap the phones. There's specific electronic taps you can get with a search warrant, and then there's the bugs that you can plant on the phone. And so, of course, everybody was concerned about that. It turned out not to be the case. And those types of bugs, if anybody is interested, are actually visible. You can actually see when somebody's put some kind of a sending device. The other areas that I thought were interesting is the theater. He had a full-on theater at the house that had rooms in it, and some of the rooms had beds. And initially I thought, well, that's kind of weird. But the beds were in the theater, and they were set up for kids to come in and watch movies that were in hospital beds and couldn't get out of bed, that couldn't sit up. They would bring the beds in. There was an elevator to get them up to this second level where you could lay in bed and join the crowd, watch the movies. There was no glass in between, so that nobody seemed segregated or separated from the rest of the kids. Okay, we have another call. Hi, caller, you there? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi there. I'm just kind of wondering, with all your background experience, what prompted you or what made you go into the profession of a private investigator?
Oh, okay. I graduated high school in 1974. It's kind of a long story. I don't want to spend that much time on it. At the time, I was tried to get into law enforcement because I was never a police officer. They were typically hiring Vietnam vets, which is fine. I was too young to go to Vietnam, which is not a complaint, by the way. And at the time, back at that time period, the vets were getting 10 extra points for taking tests. And one thing sort of led to another, and I was in college also at the time, and I met up with a former U.S. Marshal who was dying of leukemia. And interestingly, in my relationship with again, Tom Mesereau or Harlan Braun, some of these attorneys that I work with, Pat Harris, who, again, I'll say it again, his birthday today, you work with these attorneys and you develop a relationship. We're friends. And the same way that the gentleman I started with, his name was Angelo Canzaneri, same way with Angelo, you become friends with your clients, and he knew he was dying. He had leukemia. And it was beyond the point of no return, so to speak. And so he hired me so that I could eventually take over his business. That's, again, my goal ultimately in going to college. Everything was, again, criminology, although at the time it was administration of justice. But that's how I got into being a private investigator, is that at the time that law enforcement was really only hiring Vietnam vets, and there was a whole women's movement. There's a lot of issues, but that's how I got into being a private investigator. Not a very romantic story, but the work sort of went from there. You still with us?
I certainly am. I have an additional question.
Sure.
It's my understanding today that one being a police officer or a retired police officer does not automatically grant them a license to be a private investigator, but they still have to go through a process. Is that correct?
Yeah. In fact, even if you're still a working police officer, you don't even have to be retired. But a lot of times, a lot of people, some of these people have separate jobs. I knew a detective out of West Valley who actually had a plumbing business, very successful. But people get second jobs, whether it's law enforcement officers, whatever, and they can apply for a license. But nowadays, simply being a police officer or retired police officer no longer gets you the license the way it almost automatically did many years ago. And then you have to have 3,000 hours of documented time doing actually an investigation. So when you're out on patrol, and I don't want to be disrespectful, when you're on patrol, it's always some sort of an investigation. But pulling somebody over and checking to see if they have weapons or whatever the case may be doesn't constitute an investigation. So if you're a traffic officer, as opposed to being an officer assigned to traffic detail, the guys that go out and actually do the investigations for traffic accident, because again, that's considered to be an investigation. So if that's what you're doing, as opposed to being on patrol or responding to, domestic violence calls, those aren't really investigations. They no longer qualify. So yeah, just being a former law enforcement officer, unfortunately, doesn't qualify you anymore. And then you have to take a test. I have a friend who's a retired deputy. His wife was a detective with the sheriff's department. She left as well. I know she took the test, and I don't know her, but I imagine if she was a detective with LA Sheriff's Department, my understanding is the first time out she failed the test.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very surprising to me. And again, part of the problem is I think that because people tend to equate being a private investigator more with civil cause of action, than criminal cause of action. And I have a feeling that the test, and again, yeah, I took mine in 1980, I don't know, it was 1981. And I think that nowadays when you take that test, it's probably geared more toward the civil aspect than the criminal, and I think that's why she failed. I certainly don't believe she's not qualified. And again, my understanding is she did take it a second time and passed. And interestingly, again, with modern technology, apparently when you take the test, they give you the results right there on the spot. I think I had to wait 4 or 5 months for it to come in the mail. It's like the attorneys taking the bar. They have to sit around and wait and wait and wait and wait. Can I ask you a question?
What happens?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, what happens when you have a case initiating in California that takes you outside the state of California? What restrictions do you incur?
Several states. I can tell you that Nevada and Washington and Oregon, Oregon not so much, states that I've worked in, Arizona, several states have what's called reciprocal enforcement. So you can actually go into that state, you can actually work under your California license, and they afford that to you for, and this is where it gets weird, for 30 days. I've read the law in several states, specifically in Washington state, and it's interesting because it says you can work there under another state for 30 days, but it doesn't qualify whether it's 30 days in a row, 30 days in a calendar year, 30 days in your entire lifetime. So I really don't know what that means. Again, David Rudolph, the attorney from the Netflix show The Staircase, if you haven't seen it, you should watch it if you have Netflix. I've been in communication with him, and one of the things that's interesting is North Carolina actually has a reciprocal enforcement, but then there's a list of 7 states, and other than Tennessee, I don't really remember the states, that they don't accept the reciprocal enforcement from. So if you're licensed in Tennessee, the state of North Carolina doesn't acknowledge it. If you're licensed in California, they do. Again, I don't know, because again, it's sort of a new piece of information. I don't know really what qualifies or what constitutes their justification for reciprocal enforcement. I have no idea. So may I ask you?
Very interesting.
Yeah, may I ask you a question? Are you familiar with the
Sure.
Robert Blake case at all?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you too well.
Are you familiar with the Robert Blake case at all?
Very, very lightly.
I was kind of wondering why all of a sudden I'm getting contacted by these production companies that want to pursue a Robert Blake story. Again, I don't get it. This was 2001. The trial was in 2005. So I'm sort of trying to understand why literally 13 years after the trials concluded, 20, was it 2001? So 17 years after the actual incident, why anybody has any interest in this. Is it, if they did a show, would you watch that show?
I have not. I plan to.
Really, you do? Okay. May I ask why? I mean, what is it
Just
about Robert Blake's curiosity?
I think there's still curiosity of it. I think that many of the TV tabloid shows still have a viewing audience, and makes it doable for them to rebroadcast or reignite the fire, I guess.
Yeah, again, I don't have a lot of interest in going back through Blake over and over and over and over. I've done that on too many occasions, and again, I frankly just don't get it. But I knew Robert. I dealt with Robert in the exact opposite of Michael. I really had no contact with Michael Jackson. Blake, I think I probably had too much contact with, and anybody who's ever dealt with him, it's very easy to have too much conversation with Blake. Okay, thank you again for your call. I appreciate it. We are out of time. We're shutting down early, or not early, but again, anybody that has any questions, you want to get in touch with me, my cell phone is area 818-744-9827. You're welcome to either send me a text. You're welcome to call, not when we're on the air, but if you have a question, you want to give me a call, feel free. We will see you next Thursday. You're listening to All Things P.I. with Scott Ross, and thank you.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3